Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversants are Paul VanderKlay and Dave, the Distributist. Dave is he's a distributist, which I still don't really understand what that means, but he has been running a YouTube channel for 6 or 7 years now and has gotten his chops in a different iteration of internet politic and essay writing and live streaming. And he's been continuing to put out fabulous content that is around mapping the dissident right from a Catholic perspective. Definitely do check out his channel. Paul VanderKlay is a Reformed Calvinist minister located in California, and he too runs a YouTube channel where he maps the post-Jordan Peterson phenomena, which he calls his corner of the internet. In this conversation, we talk about so many things. We talk about community building. We talk about the difference between online society and offline society. We talk about the history of Christianity, authenticity, spirituality. The list goes on and on and on. I have no idea how to summarize it, but these two men are brilliant and great guests. And so I'm just going to drop you right into the middle of the fray. Here's Paul VanderKlay and Dave the Distributist. I've been trying to think of what to talk to you guys about, but I've been watching your content over the last week, really diving in. And one crossover that you guys have is that you're both really focused, at least recently. Well, Paul, you've always been focused on this, but Dave, you've been bringing it more and more recently. You're focused on community building.
Yeah.
Like what are we doing? What is this YouTube? What are these connections? What are these networks? And Dave, your domain is different than Paul's. Paul's is more religious and spiritual explicitly. And Dave's, yours more rhetorical and political explicitly, even though you do have tie-in to religion.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I always say metapolitical because I'm kind of a political pacifist, but I think, didn't you talk to Aaron McIntyre recently, Paul? Or should I call you Pastor VanderKlay?
No, you can call me Paul.
I'll
okay.
call
I'm
you
a
Paul.
Protestant.
Yeah, I never know
father, I suppose.
Yeah, that sounds odd. Yeah, you're right. I guess I'll call you Paul if that's all right with you.
That's fine.
I think that everyone's sort of moving towards building community and getting people in real life because there's a growing awareness that the online space just incentivizes really bad and toxic behavior. I think ideologically, I think there's sort of a question that came up in the Aaron McIntyre stream between Local Distance and Aaron about exactly the disposition that community has to take towards the mainstream, right? And I think that I get the sense that Paul and Local Distance are a lot more positive about, more moderate attitudes. And I think Aaron and I are thinking more along the lines of there has to be a little more of a break, but I guess we could explore that, right?
A break how? Between internet virtuality and
I mean,
real
I guess sort of the mainstream institutions. The person I was talking to, Bennett, he has an organization called Exit, which is about developing alternative business relationships outside of sort of the corporate sphere. And this is not a project that I'm particularly working on right now, but that's when I talk to people in real life in my own community with the whole basket weaving project, that is a direction that people are thinking in, is sort of how can we go off grid as much as possible. Obviously there's the whole Yarvin thing. He's been doing the rounds everywhere these days about his skepticism towards the Ron DeSantis and the Jordan Peterson projects. So I don't know, I guess that might be an interesting topic is how we see society going forward. Either Paul, can you remember what did you talk to Aaron about again? Can you jog my
Christian
memory?
nationalism.
Christian nationalism.
Oh yeah, that's another great angle too. I mean, this is interesting because I'm kind of the Christian wing of the more right wing section, and Christian nationalism is interesting because it gets a lot of criticism from sort of both sides of the spheres. I don't know. We could kind of take this conversation in any direction you wanted to, Ben. I have a tendency to ramble, but Christian nationalism gets criticism because people accuse it of being the moral majority 2.0. And the moral majority was largely unsuccessful. So people are asking, well, why are we repeating something that's that doesn't have that we know didn't work in the past when the coalition it represented was much more powerful. So I know I watched your live stream, Paul, but I'm really drawing a blank onto the conclusions you came to with Aaron. I'm like, because I knew when I watched, I'm like, oh, this would be a great place to take. We could just pick off right where they left off, and now it's 2 weeks later, and I can't remember anything because I haven't had the best sleep. So, Ben, whatever you want to talk about, I'm totally game. Just ask the questions, and I'll try to stop rambling.
Yeah, no. Paul, I'll let Paul respond to that, but I do sense that, Dave, you're much more skeptical than Paul is. Yes, and maybe at some point as this conversation unfolds, we can kind of get to, is that a demeanor? Is that how does optimism and skepticism, your two brands or your two outlooks, where do they clash? Where do they overlap? How can they help each other when we view topics of community building, our likelihood of getting crap on the internet or toxic behavior and how to deal with toxic behavior, and both on a systemic level and then on a personal level?
I'm sure actually probably Paul and I are I mean, we all see the same horrible stuff that goes up on Twitter and get irritated at it. And Twitter has a tendency to bring out the worst sides in people, right? But for instance, a lot of sort of more moderate people are angry at Aaron because of all his memes are super spicy. But I know Aaron to be like personality wise in real life. I don't know if I've talked to him personally. He's a very moderate person, a very kind individual. Yeah. So you never would understand that from like the memes that Aaron assumes for circulating, right? I think I have an idea. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, Paul, but okay. I'm pretty sure that I will be of the opinion that we are sort of in a transformative civilizational moment where I do think that the old Christian civilization is going to give birth to a new Christian civilization, but there's going to have to be an imagistic and narrative break with that, on par with the Reformation, such that the new Christian civilization will see itself going in a radically different direction, in the same way that the Protestants saw themselves as going in a radically different direction from medieval Christian civilization. And I imagine that Paul wants to fix the old, and when I say the old Christian civilization, I mean Christian civilization since 1507. I think that your perspective is more reparative, because I'm saying that because I understand Jordan Peterson's project to be reparative. And I think my project is transformative, or not. I want to say apocalyptic. Sounds like I'm trying to imitize eschaton, but I see something critically has to change. But sorry, Paul, I'm rambling. What are your perspectives?
It's a Pastor Jedi trick to let people talk.
Yeah, I've not been trained in that. But yeah.
I don't know. I've got a large amount of skepticism about Jordan's project, but I still think he's a very helpful voice. I think the question, Tim Keller had a conversation with, this is what I bounced, Ben, your conversation off with Local Distance and Aaron. And Tim Keller looks at this and says, basically, okay, modernity is running its course. And the real fork is more modernity or something else. Usually with these forks, it's never an either or. It's usually a both and.
Yeah.
Part of what happened in, part of the experiment that was the United States was, can you have a Protestant nationalism without a state church? And the United States sort of had a Protestant consensus beneath.
Yeah, absolutely.
Subsequent religious groups, including the Catholics, came in and had to accommodate themselves to that religious pluralism and sort of assume a lot of the religious agreements and then secularism itself became sort of a secret, a hidden church. And so you had all of these Protestant values and Christian values, because, of course, the Protestants inherit the vast majority of their DNA from Catholicism, because every reactive project, in a sense, emerges with that project. And so there's an immense amount of shared DNA. And as I think Tim Keller gets it right, that what's been happening is that especially after the Cold War, with the rise of the new atheists, Christianity, which had sort of gotten a pass in during the Cold War, say, well, we'll be science in terms of the lower order, and we'll be Christian in terms of values. That then begins to get critiqued by the scare over religious fundamentalism. Oh, there's Islamic fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, and which was really an extension of the fundamentalist modernist fight. And so we're at this point now where I think Jonathan Peugeot is correct that all of this clown world that we're seeing is an attempt to take the fringe into the center, but the fringe can't function as a center. It's simply never equipped to. And so in that sense, the United States, again, is kind of at the forefront in that there needs to be a new center, but it sort of passed with a center which was Christian nationalistic, even though we didn't use the term. I just finished listening to The Rest is History on Ronald Reagan, which I thought were 3 very excellent episodes. But the question now is to where? And so we have this, elderly Democratic president who's still a boomer, and you've got this Republican Donald Trump who's still a boomer. Some of Eric Weinstein's themes come through here. And the country doesn't quite know where to go next. And I think Keller is correct that a lot of Roman Catholics are sort of resurgent and saying, well, monarchy, church, monarchy works. We're all sort of watching England with, there's a monarchy there. Is that what we're talking about? Of course, orthodoxy is coming to the fore. And that's sort of the new hot chick on the ecclesiastical block. But I think you are right in that we are in a transition phase. But the deep assumptions that we didn't need to actually own or look at that were deeply Christian from the old world are now sufficiently, those roots are sufficiently withered that, how do we connect heaven and earth? And I think it's in that frame that Jordan Peterson comes in. But Peterson and Tim Keller both are basically saying, no, we need classical liberalism again. But now there's a whole realm of political conservatives who are saying liberalism is dead. Okay. Where do we go? Back to Rome? Back to Constantinople? Constantinople's, in northern Turkey.
Yeah, I mean, well, I could riff on that, but then do we want to go live now, or are we recording?
Oh, we're not going live. This is pre-recorded, so we're in the convo.
We're already recording? Okay, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I would have given a little bit more of a spiel if I had known we were recording. But
you spiel away. But is classical liberalism sufficiently sexy enough? I mean, does it have does it have
the smell
juice?
of Old Spice 1972?
I mean, my impression is classical liberalism basically only works for certain types of Protestant societies. And as long as people were assimilating into that Protestant substructure, which many Catholics did, then this could be the basis of a society. But this assumption is no longer holding. And so all of this liberal theorists that come from the Scottish Enlightenment, or that are heirs of the Scottish Enlightenment, they're all built around a model assumption that's no longer holding. The classic way to live in a multi-ethnic society is more of a, I mean, I'm not, you can, if someone has a better idea than this, then we'll go for it. But the classic way, there's sort of two options. The first one is what most modern people want to do is they want to subsume everyone into a gigantic managerial bureaucracy and use surveillance architectures to control people. And I'm sure that's the solution that our modern government wants. The classic solution is to have a more distributed system of power where people are sort of assigned to ethnic enclaves, and then power is delegated from there, sort of the Austro-Hungarian or the Ottoman model. Obviously, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman model are deeply illiberal in the ways that we conceptualize them today. They're
Can you paint a picture of these this
sensibility?
This model? What is this? Is this a caste system or some sort of aristocracy, or how is the power delegated to these ethnic groups?
So in the Ottoman model, which is sort of the more extreme version, the Ottoman Empire recognized individual. So, for instance, you weren't a citizen of the Ottoman Empire; you were a Christian, and then the Ottoman Sultanate would deal with the Christian community, or maybe the Assyrian Christian community as a whole. And if they had a problem, they would go to that community and they would either ask for the criminal to be extradited, or they would impose a penalty on that community, and then the community would govern itself more or less internally. The Ottoman bureaucracy didn't really have a concept of a universal citizen the way that modern states do. And this has been one way that people have talked about. This has been one way that multi-ethnic civilizations have maintained political stability without having necessarily some kind of narrative unity, the way that the West has had for the last. I mean, nations have had narrative unity internally for hundreds of years since we decided that that's the way we were going to manage things in the Treaty of Westphalia. The middle ground solution seems to be, the assumptions of that middle ground solution seem to be going away. And that's the crisis of modernity that we're dealing with right now. And I'm kind of curious. I see that as sort of the alternative, the broad alternative we have to classical liberalism that's immediately suggests itself. And we have to kind of negotiate with that, with the fact that the solution people want to go with is just let's have everyone organized into a gigantic managerial bureaucracy. And I think a lot of people are not very happy with that solution because it necessarily has to stifle thought and stifle human action and human thriving in order for it to continue.
I think so. The founders of my little community, the Dutch Calvinists in America, they would always put forth Abraham Kuyper and his pillarization. Abraham Kuyper was both sort of a religious leader, became prime minister of the Netherlands at the beginning of the 20th century, implemented a system of pillarization in the Netherlands, which sounds something similar to what you're talking about. But the Netherlands is, a few million people on a country far smaller than New England. And I think part of what we're wrestling with is empire and scale. So America, I mean, again, to go back to, let's say, the Reagan years, what Reagan managed to do was embody a mythology that, I mean, if you look at his election against Walter Mondale, I mean, this enormous landslide. A friend of mine put on Twitter this morning how he showed the electoral map of Ronald Reagan and said, could you possibly imagine this today?
Yeah, it's impossible, right?
And where we began when we started talking about community here, I think part of the reason many of us are looking to community, local community, face-to-face community, I think it picks up on what Rod Dreher picked up in terms of the Benedict option. There's a sense that if we're going to grow the kinds of human beings we need, they need to begin with understanding face-to-face, person-to-person relationships and communication. And because the world of screens is clearly disrupting the sorts of human formation that up until the dawn of Set, the god that emerged in the middle of the 20th century of screens in our homes telling us what to think, up until that point, that this very basic human fabric for community could simply be assumed, and now it's increasingly disrupted.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be. I mean, you mentioned Reagan, and the way I see Reagan is I see that the 1960s happened, or the late 1960s to be exact, happened, which was a social revolution in the United States that caused an enormous amount of disruption to how our elites saw themselves and America's role in the world, and specifically sort of the college-educated elite. Now, this revolution went up for a few political referendums. The first was Nixon and the second was Reagan. And in both times, when the sort of 1960s was put up for a vote in a way that the American people understood it, it was voted down very radically, which is what caused the sort of, these incredible things you're talking about, the Reagan's victory against Mondale, Reagan's victory against Carter, Nixon's victory in 72, and so on and so forth. The problem is that these sort of rejections of the 1960s didn't stop the force of the Cultural Revolution that was underfoot, and progressivism, so the force of the change that started in the 60s, kind of won the peace to where we are right now, where I think we have kind of two Americas that are radically out of sync with each other, and I'm not so sure how you put liberalism back together in this process or this environment.
Well, I think in some ways, I mean, you can say it was put up to a vote. Nixon, of course. So one of the themes that I've been working on, we recently had Jesus Revolution, this feel-good movie about the Jesus people. Mm-hmm. If you read about the Jesus people, it didn't last very long, partly because the sex and drugs weren't terribly stable and conducive to family life. The children of the hippies, in many ways, embraced a conservatism. But yet what you saw in, let's say, the Democratic Party in Clinton with the continuing reign of the baby boomers was a synthesis of, obviously, the counterculture, which in many ways won in the arts, even while the managerial class was keeping milk in the fridge and the lights on. And so what we've had over the last generation are sort of the mythology of the counterculture, which, you know, there is connection there. You have to see that also in light of the civil rights movement, which again was a deeply Christian movement. Martin Luther King couldn't have gone anywhere without the church. And so what we've seen is sort of the synthesis of these two things, to the point now where even someone like Jordan Peterson, with his attempt to strengthen the foundations of a modernist liberal foundation, has integrated with them, well, maybe Sam Harris should have taken more drugs instead of less, and then he'd stop being the celebrity atheist. So there's very much, I mean, John Lennon is still considered a saint. People today, when they see long hair and bell bottoms, it's like, oh, Woodstock was this. Well, just watch any treatment of Woodstock and what happened there. Woodstock seems to be a nice movie to go to, but is that really the life you want to live? And it seems like as a country over the last generation, we've said you can have your drugs and the milk in the fridge too for your kids.
Okay. So to recapitulate, you're making me think of Mary Harrington's point about Clintonian feminism, where they talk the big talk about libertinism and all the sex that you want, all the sleeping around you want, but the people who are promoting that are actually living very Protestant, very stable lives, because they know that that's the good life to have. So we have the mythology of you can do whatever you want, you can be whatever you want, And that is only afforded because people are getting up. The people that are running things are still running things. And now what we see is kind of, and I hear a lot of people saying this really recently, that everybody's stupid. Every system, everything that's coming out, like the people who are running the show, it just seems like there's this dearth of competence that is showing itself at this point. So we want our cake and eat it too, but the bridges are going to collapse.
Right. The Obamas can preach sexual liberty, but Barack and Michelle are there for life. They're a bedrock family. And that compared to, let's say, a president who was on his third wife and bragged about his treatment of Hollywood starlets, et cetera, et cetera. So in many ways, you live like a Puritan, but talk like a libertine.
Yeah, and also there's the fact that if you're rich, you can overcome the obstacles that are presented by drug use and irresponsible family behavior and stuff like that. This is, there is no America at the other end of the sexual revolution, which, something to mention another British author, Lewis Perry, points out, is that there is a pre-sexual revolution idea of how intergenerational family life is supposed to work. There is no post-sexual revolution plan for how family life is supposed to work. The best they can do is this sort of girl boss. You said Clintonian feminism. I don't know if Mary Harrington uses this term, but this is what we on the online right call girl boss feminism. Girl boss feminism doesn't really work. I mean, it works, again, basing this broadly on my own experience, being sort of a child of Silicon Valley area, California, or spending a significant amount of time in that region. What happens is that the girl boss works for the top 5% of people. If you can be a girl boss, get an enormously high salary job and a husband who earns more than you can have 3 kids and that works. But for everyone who falls below that threshold, it ends up in total disaster. You spend a lot of time pursuing jobs that, by the very nature, if you want to start a family, aren't going to pay out the amount of money that they'll cost you long term. And in the meantime, for even if you go even a rung lower, you're going to the debt you spend on education is never going to be paid back by your job itself. And you can see this in the numbers. Millennials they're not forming families because this model of girl boss feminism, it's a model for the elites that just does not work for anyone who's not in an elite position. And this is always what frustrates me with these sociological models, is that the progressives, what they'll always do is, when people come to them and point to these problems out with modern post-sexual revolution society, they'll point to the fact that wealth is a better explanatory factor for success than family formation and good habits. But the problem is we can't make everyone Nancy Pelosi. And I know if you're saying, like, well, if we make all of America as rich as Nancy Pelosi, they'll all have great family lives, despite the fact that, I think there's so many reasons why that can't happen. There's not enough money in the system to make everyone as rich as Nancy Pelosi, and moreover, the reason why Nancy Pelosi's children can get away with this are that they have a sort of slave class of underlings that take care of these things for them, and not everyone can climb on top of everyone else. And so, a lot of the work we've done post 1960s is to make sort of an unsustainable system seem sustainable in the short term, but now it's very, very obviously not working anymore. And I think that's what's kind of leading to this post-liberalism. Nobody wants to go back to the liberalism of the 19th century, nor can we. But the post-civil rights, post-feminist liberalism also, I mean, it seems even more fatally flawed for a variety of reasons.
I think it's also helpful to remember that the counterculture grows out of sort of the post, how much battlefield trauma was in the 1950s America. That's one interesting question. And the second one is, in the 1950s and early 60s, and really throughout the 60s, there's this deep insecurity in American stability about, and I think this is what the conservatives have to face, there's this deep insecurity about whether the corporate man is an authentic man. And what I loved, Benjamin, about your conversation with Auron and local distance is that, I mean, it was the conservatives asking the question, where is our base? And I think that's really where both sides of the culture war are really threatened. The progressives want to say, well, it's our shining vision of the future. But if you stop them and say, can you get a little bit more specific about that future beyond, deliverance from restraint? I mean, what then is the end of man or woman or trans man? But then the conservatives have their problem, which is, okay, yeah, milk in the fridge, pension in the bank, 2 cars in the garage, and a fiber internet connection. Good, but is this all there is? And so I think part of what our society is having tremendous difficulty with, which should be completely obvious from what we're doing in the arts, is do we have an eschatology? I mean, is it The Last of Us? Is it The Walking Dead? Is it, I don't think our culture today would do Star Trek again. And just seeing what has happened with Star Trek suggests that because we don't have a religious core, we're really struggling with an eschatology.
Well, yeah, I guess the eschatology for most secular people is provided by things like global warming and maybe now this new AI stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's more foundational. I don't even think we have a narrative to tell ourselves for the moment, really, regardless of what the ultimate end of humanity is in terms of some kind of apocalypse.
Dave, there was a talk that you gave, I think it was I don't know when you gave it, but you put it on your channel a few months ago, and you talk about this yogurt commercial. You made a really brilliant point about the end game of BreadTube. So, which is we're in BeardTube, but BreadTube is this kind of loose collection of very smart or talkative lefties online.
Yeah.
And you painted this picture trying to understand their eschatology. They want to, and you used this yogurt commercial where it showed this future that was at once like it was 50 years ago and 100 years ahead of us now. That was,
yeah,
but you tied it together by saying they want to live in a simulation. They want to have this authenticity or this down to earth and yet futuristic kind of avatar like family structure or something like that.
Yeah, it was this bizarre. That's actually a good point, Ben. So there was about a year ago, there was this commercial for, I think it was Chobani, that had this progressive vision of what a future would look like. And the future, and the thing is that this was recut so that it was not commercialized and then circulated on left-wing forums. And all of the major left-wing bloggers kind of lost, they love this vision of the future. And basically what it is, it's just, I mean, it's like it's basically a very diverse version of being Amish, but with like little buzzy robots that fly around.
Yeah.
And the implication that, that this is somehow in line with progressive visions on sexuality. The difficulty is that the solidity, they obviously want solidity, and the vision sells you on a certain type of societal solidity that progressivism itself tries to undermine. I don't know how you have broad intergenerational communities. First of all, I don't know how you have broad intergenerational communities that are like, look so diverse, because usually if they're intergenerational, like the ethnicity normalizes to like, a medium tone rather than looking like it's been selected by a diversity committee. But you also can't have broad intergenerational communities unless you have ethics that constrain you, and you can't have broad familial relations unless you have children growing up and settling down in more or less the same modes as their parents, so that they can relate. And also you can't have you can't have a deep connection to the earth if the robots do all the work. It's like, why are they even out there doing work in the field if all these little servo robots are doing everything everywhere all at once? And if physical labor was really so valuable, then why aren't the left and the right cooperating to put on some kind of back to the land movement? That would be the obvious next step. It seems to me, considering that our visions are so similar. I mean, if this yogurt commercial is correct, then the visions of the right and the visions of the left are virtually identical, except for minor cultural fixtures that right wingers believe are necessary to keep these communities sustainably going on. But if our visions are so similar, you'd imagine that we would both be working together to do a back to the land type movement, right? My impression, though, is that what makes this vision comforting for the left is the fact that it's sort of impossible to begin with. And maybe that's a little unflattering. And I guess I didn't really design this to be flattering to the left. And maybe I'd try to, if there was a leftist here, I'd try to make this, I try to be more sympathetic. But I can't imagine a realistic, tight-knit community being something that the left would embrace, because the community itself would impose constraints that would have to be overcome, and that would be, not in leftist language, radically emancipatory. The emancipation can only be achieved through simulation, and that's the constraint that I think we're running into right now, is that we can give you a radically emancipatory reality, but only in the confines of something that we know is completely digital and completely fake. And everyone who says, no, I want something real, and I'm willing to constrain myself to achieve that, is on some sense on the same side. And that's how you have Angela Nagel and these post-leftists and these sort of old school labor people pulling in the same direction as, like I said, black-hearted reactionaries like myself, although I don't think I'm black-hearted at all, right? I think we all have one common cause, and that common cause is we want reality, and we're willing to accept constraints and hierarchy to live in something that works in reality. And I also think that's why the in real life stuff is coming back in a big way in 2023.
The what life stuff? I'm sorry.
The in real life stuff, the community building in real life. I think everyone has sort of their own project, and they're all kind of similar and different in their own ways. But this is the common direction that we're all thinking in. And it's because people want to understand what's necessary. Like what are the actual constraints you need to be a friend with somebody in real life, and so on and so forth, right?
I'm a little skeptical on the in real life stuff, because it's sort of like the idea of marriage versus a real marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, community is always about limitation, because I mean, when you have a child, there's no more selfish creature than a newborn baby. And if you're not aware of just how selfish you are, have a baby. That baby will teach you, because you can get up in the middle of the night and reason with that baby all you want. Don't you know it's in the middle of the night and you should be sleeping? Because I'd like to sleep too and be better for the both of us. Talk to that baby all you want. That baby's going to cry. So I do see now that people are like, oh yeah, the idea of community, that's really good. Okay. Do you know the cost of community? And just like the cost of a marriage. Mm-hmm. And this is always where we're at. And again, Mary Harrington I just saw a little clip of one of her interviews. She's done so many interviews in the last few weeks.
Yeah. But, I love Mary. She's amazing. I want to talk to her more. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead. But she talked about, similar themes that you were talking about, Dave, in terms of this level of liberation can only be afforded at certain peaks. And same with community. When I think about, for example, the movement my parents were a part of in the 70s. I mean, you move into the Black community. It was an integrationist. It was a civil rights integrationist methodology where you move into the community and you work in the community. You have some of those overtones today, but you do get the sense that
if you do that, you really want your Instagram and your Twitter and your TikTok going so that everybody can see you down for the cause and so on and so forth. There isn't much sense of, no, these causes cost you your life. And if you're not serious about it, and again, it's sort of like the fascination with the Amish. And I forget, a number of people have said to me, and with varying different fundamentalist religions, most people wouldn't last 2 days in the Amish community or the Hasidic community or the Islamic community because there's just so much demand on your personal space and time, on your autonomy, that, and of course, throughout most of the history of the world, you marry to survive, because without a community, you don't last.
But then, Paul, I mean, I agree with it, and it's always difficult because I like to think that I'm pursuing community. I like to think that I'm committed to things, but always there's this voice in the back of your head that says, "You're just LARPing. You're just LARPing." Right? Even when you get married and go to church every week, and you're teaching Sunday school, and you have a kid that keeps you up, the circles under my eyes, there are evidence of that. The curse of modern man is that there's always this. You're always aware of yourself doing the thing intentionally, and not as a matter of course, because to a large degree it is intentional. I could have, if I had just kind of gone with the flow, I don't think I necessarily would have been married with a kid at this stage. And so I don't know. I mean, it's never going to be, maybe if you're born inside the Amish community or you're born inside the Hasidic community, then you're completely not conscious about this process of breaking with modernity. But I can't not be conscious of that reality. And therefore, I'll never be completely immune from the objection that I'm doing this as sort of an affectation.
Maybe we're doomed, in a sense, to classical liberalism insofar as we are outside of a tight community. The only way to actually exist outside of any given community is to have a secular outlook, to be able to change the value of words, enter into community values, and then exit them when you're no longer engaged with that community. And so by classical liberalism, I do mean some sort of pluralistic ability to just fit into all these different communities. And so we are kind of in between, and that tool set is for people who are kind of more cosmopolitan, more in the fascia.
The thing is that I see liberalism kind of descending into the James Burnham style managerialism. I think that the classical liberalism, in the way that Locke imagined it, and in the way that sort of the early 20th century liberal theorists imagined it, I don't think that's a possibility in a highly multicultural society. I think it's going to descend. Well, I'm just saying, surveillance state, and you're either LARPing a culture, or I don't see how you can not LARP multiculturalism. The position of being multicultural is that you're outside of culture somehow, or you're in between cultures. You're swapping cultures. You're going from one aesthetic to another aesthetic, depending on any given business relationship or any interpersonal activity that you're doing. So I don't see how you don't LARP. There's no post multicultural position. That's a no position. And so we have to kind of just allow that to be a part of us, unless we LARP ourselves into this image, this lesser, not lesser, but more narrow personhood, that I'm Islamic, or I'm Hasidic, or I'm something much more strict. And then eventually, I've never read Cat Stevens' biography, but he was this great singer, right? You guys remember him? Yeah. I guess did Cat Stevens authentically achieve demodernization? That's an interesting question, right? He converted Islam very famously, right?
Yeah. I think your authenticity begins where your options end.
I agree with that. Again? I totally agree with that, Paul.
Your authenticity begins when your options end. Because you can be no other way. It's no longer, people often.
But hold on.
But then it goes into it again when you actually begin to own your slavery. And I mean, because there's an augering down there to the foundation.
You can give up your options. I would agree with that, but it is possible to give up optionality and say, I'm going to be constrained by this thing. I'm not going to leave this as something that I have a decision for, right?
I remember in the 1980s, I was in seminary, and there was this missionary named Viv Grigg who came to the seminary, and it was tremendously compelling. Instead of going to a different culture and sort of living a quasi-American middle-class life to minister to poor people, he moved into the village, and he moved into the poor Filipino community, into the slum, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember on one hand, it was tremendously inspirational, except at the point of which then his body isn't ready to drink all that water that all of them have grown up with. And then he gets sick. And then, oh, by the way, you do have an American passport, and your supporters from overseas can fly you out. And here you are talking in a first world seminary. How authentic is that? Whereas, of course, in Christian terms, the incarnation, Jesus comes in and fully inhabits a Jewish baby, and then which makes the temptations of Christ turn the stones into bread. Embrace the fame by leaping off the pinnacle of the temple. Bow the political knee to me, and I will make you Caesar. So this, I think, it is there's a deep connection between our affluence, our liberty, our autonomy, and the sense that all we can do is LARP.
Yeah, I really want to embrace that statement. Your authenticity begins where your optionality ends. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's a nice rule of thumb for this process. And I mean, I guess there's a limitation, because I think that if you choose to give up your optionality, if you choose to constrain yourself, I guess like you it's hard, because that seems to me still very, very authentic. Christ chose his cross. God chose the incarnation, we're taught. Does that make it less authentic? Almost every Christian would say, no, that's fully authentic. I guess the curse of modernity is that even when we choose to constrain ourselves, we always have sort of an escape button that sort of exists in asterisks around that decision. That it can't ever be like, oh, you chose this, and now, you are fully. Now you've made the choice for Calvary, and now you have to suffer. It's always, the asterisk always is, the Christ temptation never ends, right? It's like the Kazantzakis novel where he's being tempted literally when he's on the cross to in the moment before his death. It does not end in the desert. And so, I don't know, maybe that's just a feeling. Maybe the inauthenticity in that sense is completely illusory, right? But it's and that definitely contributes to it.
Paul, you're a little bit older than me. I'm a little bit older than Dave. Has your relationship to authenticity, or if that is even a salient idea, because authenticity seems like a kind of downstream from hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is no longer a problem for us. We wrestle more with authenticity. If that's been something for you, has that changed with age? Has it loosened its shackles on you, questioning, am I just going through the motions? Am I really this way?
Well, part of what happens with age is that, I mean, you start out with all potential and nothing
your
else.
Options.
And the older you get, your options continue to constrain. And you've, in some ways, I pastor a dying church, and most of the people that I minister to know they are dying. Most of them will not be here 10 years from now. That's a near certainty. And there is a degree of freedom that comes then, that, okay, the cake is baked. This is who I am. I remember Jordan Peterson talking at one point about people have a limited number of large transformations in their life. There are some people that, for example, I was just out east where my mother's family is from, and I was sitting down with my cousin, who was my childhood friend. He's a few months difference in age than myself. And I thought, he is exactly the same person he has been his whole life. You see some people with big transformations. And I remember after Jordan Peterson had his time away, he had to ask himself, is there another transformation in me? Can I really change at some point? And you get to a certain age and you begin to realize, no, death is coming. And the decisions that I've made, I've brought 5 people into this world. They are my children. More and more pieces on the board are set. The plays are limited. Now you have to prioritize, what do I really want to do? Who do I really want to be? Who really am I that I cannot change?
Interesting. This is the sort of a fundamental limitation that we all have to come to terms with, and I guess I'm mentally not quite there. I understand this. Everything you said is true, but I guess I'm mentally not there yet. But I want to. The thing that I want more than anything else is to kind of be able to hand off to my child or children, God willing, a future that looks optimistic. And it feels like in order to do that, there has to be a project that's out there that isn't self-consciously in a mode of perishing. And I understand that we all occupy mortal coils that are in the process of dying, but I don't know. It felt that it feels that something actually might come about that's more hopeful.
I am not pessimistic about the future, even if I have zero idea about most of the challenges we face. And that very much is an article of faith. And I always tell people I'm a religious believer, I'm a political skeptic. I'm Augustinian enough that I trust politics to get things wrong on a very regular basis. And it's simply the grace of God that we haven't nuked ourselves, that we haven't destroyed. I mean, because if you look at our track record, it's just such a clusterfuck. But here we are still, and that the lights are on, and the the trains are running, and there's milk in the fridge. That's the grace of God. And so you have to go into the future, I believe, with a faith in something above and beyond the milk of human kindness, because that has its limits.
Is there room for so one mode of answering the problem people bring up, even people who are not religious or who are atheist, good friend, regular guest on my show, James Lindsay, supreme atheist, new atheist to the core, becoming more and more Christian in practice out of necessity. And
amazing
he does
watch.
His process. It's
pretty to watch.
It's pretty
I'm going to stand back from this Christianization of James Lindsay. It is very interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
But he's working through that mentally, and and one critique of the woke is that it's a religion, and maybe that's because there's this religious gap in our culture. But I wonder, prior to that religion, is there not like a religious sentiment, just kind of something even deeper than humility? Like, is there room in society to begin to cultivate just an openness to what you call faith, Paul, right? An openness to that which corrects beyond that which messes things up. And is that a part of either of your projects?
It's clearly a part of mine. I'm a Christian minister. And because I believe Jesus calls us to love our neighbors all the way up to and including our enemies. And of course, that means atheists and agnostics and people of other religions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is then how to love. But there's the famous 9-dot problem, which gave us that worn out, well, you have to draw outside the box, think outside the box. Well, I really do believe that the only way human beings can actually function is if they have an eschatology, which is thinking outside of the box of secularity. And that, of course, has become the line of demarcation between religious and non-religious. But as we spoke of a few minutes ago, at this moment, as a culture, we seem to be unable to generate an eschatology beyond some sort of virtuality. You see a bunch of shows where Kurzweil's singularity has come, and we upload ourselves into some kind of AI machine. And if you have enough money to afford the freemium upgrades, you can have a nice virtual life in some server somewhere. Beyond that, all of our stories are apocalyptic, and I shouldn't say apocalyptic because, of course, that comes from the book of Revelation, which is the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, which has a very happy ending in the book.
And apocalypse itself, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a pastor, it does mean unveiling, right? So in there, the word apocalypse presupposes a revelatory teleology and a revelatory eschatology, which is completely absent from modern eschatology.
And I think, so Star Trek imagined we were going to go out into the stars, and the Federation is sort of like, the Western pack. And if you watch the 1960s version of Star Trek, the Klingons are like Russians, basically. On you go. So I think it's going to be very interesting what happens to new atheists like James Lindsay. And I mean, this is sort of the group of people that I am swimming in, the Jordan Peterson group, who Jordan Peterson helped them see mythology, helped them find a place for the Bible. Now, what is also happening with a great many of them is they are misfits. And so a lot of the misfits are going to orthodoxy. Many of them are trying to go to church, but that hasn't gone well necessarily. And so there's a lot of people who want to believe. One of the most common things I get is someone will come up to me and say, I really love your videos. I listened to all your stuff. I found you through Jordan Peterson, yada, yada, yada. But I just can't quite believe in the resurrection. They're sort of on the cusp of a new enchantment, but they can't get over the hump, and so that nihilism continues to weigh them down, that all you are is a trousered ape, and all you finally have to look forward to is the big sleep.
The problem with belief in my generation and younger is that it's kind of cringe. You mention a certain group of people who are attracted to Jordan Peterson, who can't believe things. It's hard for. I don't think that belief is necessarily even understood what that even means to believe things. We believe things literally, and that's why I do. That's why I'm continually fascinated by genders, because it's always about recognizing a pattern, trying to fulfill an expectation, like this belief in yourself as this thing. Even if you don't believe in gender, as the feminists do, they still really cling to their womanhood as something that's very important to them. when we talk about religious, when we talk about young men approaching religion from the post 60s, from the 70s and 80s and 90s, belief is kind of cringe. It's like, now I just give up my creativity. I just give up like my questions and my skepticism, and I have to wrestle with this old text. Like, how do I even do that? So just learning the art of what that is that they mean by belief is one huge conversation.
And that gets into the LARP question too.
Belief is constraining, and that's what I don't know. I guess to me, constraining is not cringe. I guess I feel like we live in a more cringe age than humanity ever has before in its past. I wish we had a better definition of cringe, but it's usually some kind of just something that's embarrassing, something that looks fake or affected. And the thing is that, I think, Paul, you're right. I mean, it's cringe because it feels like LARP. I don't think anyone thinks that genuine belief or people who are living pre-modern lives are cringe or embarrassing. I think they believe that if they try to, that it'll come off as false or fake if they attempt to actually craft their lives in that direction. I guess I always wondered why, though, if we're so sensitive to trying on as modern people, if we're so sensitive to putting on an identity that is not our own, why do people feel so comfortable changing their genders or people will change anything about themselves regardless of how silly it looks, but they're not going to try on the religion of their grandparents because for the first few years of doing it they're going to feel like they're not quite a true believer. That seems odd to me, I guess.
That's a great point.
Dave, do you go to Latin Mass or?
I do not. I'm a Novus Ordo.
So how loudly do you sing those hymns? How much do you throw yourself into the worship?
And I'm not that much of a. I used to be a singer, but not so much anymore. And there's a big difference because some churches are more traditional and they put a little bit of Latin in their mass, and I always like that, even if it's not the Latin mass. But the church I go to currently is much more contemporary, and so I don't know. I mean, you're right. Contemporary worship does feel a little bit out of place because, especially the way it currently exists, it feels like it was this compromise that was developed in the 70s, and we're still occupying this kind of compromise, whereas almost everyone on the church would feel kind of more comfortable on one side of the line or the other. And so it feels always in modern churches, and I don't think this is just a Catholic thing, but it feels like Christian church is in a generational limbo. And a lot of the people either want it to feel more pre-modern or more postmodern. I think pre-modern and postmodern are the same thing, in my opinion. And then the other half of people, usually the older half, want the church to feel more at home in their idea of what modernity entailed, which arguably is not manifest in the society we currently live in. So I would definitely say there's a little bit of alienation in modern worship for me that way. I have friends who are Latin Mass Catholics, but I mean, they probably think that I'm not going in whole hog on my ideas, but
yeah.
I don't know if that's the same in Protestant churches. In the 90s and aughts, the Protestant churches were in the middle of a worship war. And what has happened in Protestantism is that you have the big sound, mega church, praise and worship, Pentecostal, sort of the heirs of the Jesus movement and all of that. But then now you've got this new neo-sacramentalism on the other side, which is Anglican, liturgical. And so the Protestants just sort structurally and institutionally. I mean, that's how Protestants manage their pluralism. That's why the Catholic Church always just fascinates me. Just watching all of this within one container.
like Catholic Church, there's an enormous amount of inertia, and people will be stuck in churches even though they don't like the liturgy at all, because of the sort of loyalty to the apparatus and the line of succession, and so there always is going to be more inertia in Catholic churches. But I get the sense that probably what's going on in the Catholic Church is just the liturgical sorting, Paul, you described, that already went on in the Protestant churches. You'd imagine that Protestants would be ahead of the curve in terms of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of broached that because, Paul, you're talking about people who are kind of brought to mythology by Jordan Peterson, and then they get into Peugeot, and they get into this mind space where they're playing with ideas and they say, oh, this is tied to my virtues, my values, and history and stuff. But when you go to church, you sing, you smell, you shake hands, you drink punch, and it's not just belief. It's not just a heady thing. I mean, maybe, you do some community service, you pick up trash, you feed some soup, but just that worship aspect is even more, it seems, might even be even more alien to these Christian curious people. Yeah.
One friend of mine, he had been coming here a while, and he said to me one day, I still have no idea what's going on at 11 o'clock Sunday morning. I just have no idea what you people are doing. And I have that regular because I have this YouTube channel. And so people will, oh, he's in Sacramento. Oh, he's a minister. Oh, he has a church. I'll come to his church. And they come in and they just kind of look around, and they're there once, and it's like, that was just strange. So then, of course, I have this estuary thing which is much more like my channel, where you come in and we, what do you want to talk about? And we talk about that. And so then that's why estuary is always sort of church adjacent. And it's in some ways for people who are watching the YouTube channel and, oh, this is a place where we can talk. Okay. But worship. And then I've also got people who, I remember one guy said to me once, what does it mean that I go to mass on Sunday and I listen to a Calvinist minister 5 days a week on YouTube? I have no idea what that means. But I really do think that a big piece of what's going on now is that at some point, Protestantism is a reactive movement. It's reacting against the Catholic Church, both big C and small c. Yes. And that protest has to end. You cannot live in perpetual protest. And I actually think the protest is coming together. But now you've got the Orthodox there too. And so, how many more centuries will it take for the family, at least to one degree or another, get back together? Although Christianity has always had, dissonant groups.
Yeah.
I for one think that the Reformation is coming to a close. I think that this 500-year period from 1507 to where we are now in the 21st century is the period of Reformation. And I imagine what will persist is, I think the theological disagreements will largely go unresolved, but they'll be resolved geographically and culturally. And the broader community of Orthodox Christianity, as embodied by the Nicene Creed, will be seen as sort of a family of Christian churches that will kind of be politically organized in different ways, but will be seen as kind of highly related, and they will not necessarily define each other. They will not necessarily define themselves in opposition to each other, except in the most intellectual senses.
You might be enormously surprised how much debate I currently sit through about Nicaea.
Oh, really?
All the
time. Are there objections to Nicaea in Calvin? I guess maybe there are. I thought that was
Muslims are Unitarian, Jews are Unitarian, and there are still Unitarian Christians out there. And in my little corner of the internet, Trinity comes up a lot. So, but I agree with what you're saying, but that continues to be the project of the secular. And Tom Holland was really good on this, because he noted that, right now, insurgent Islamism was an attempt to, when the Ottoman Empire fell, the Caliphate fell, and a lot of people at the beginning of the 20th century thought Islam was going to go away. But then you have this resurgent Islamism. Now even Turkey is more self-consciously Islamic. Russia, Putin tries on orthodoxy again. India, now with Modi, you
Indian
have
nationalism, yeah.
And so, of course, China, the question is, what is the religion of China? Well, we're watching that emerge. But it is a new religious era, and I think your instincts about this are correct. It's just that we have to recognize that the secular vision that captured the world was fundamentally had at its basis a Christianity, and that now in different places of the world is coming into question, including in the West.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is this is Yarvin's big. People give him, that people push back on this, but modern woke progressive ideology is a form of mainline Protestantism, and it is much more Catholic in its scope and in its efforts than the Catholic Church ever was, and it's Catholic in the sense that it's universalist, right? Which is what Catholic means. And we are all Protestants against the progressive well, I don't know. I think everyone here is a Protestant against the progressive cathedral. And so it feels so strange being a Catholic, because it feels like every Catholic these days has a Protestant heart, because we're all about to sort of fight the establishment of our own societies by like nailing principles to the wall and objecting loudly. And we're even in some sense fighting elements of church leadership. We were talking about the Latin Mass. The church leadership has turned against that, and that's an enormous number of people in that community, and they've been turned into Catholic Protestants by necessity. And in the way that Paul VanderKlay describes it, it sounds like Protestants have become liturgically Catholic in a sense. So there are these weird crossovers that the machine that was developed in the era of Reformation between the early 16th century and now, people are having to take that machinery and use it in ways that it was never designed to be used, and because of that, new things are evolving.
What do you mean by this machinery? Are you talking about like a political process, proceduralism, or what?
Oh well, yeah. Like if you were Catholic in of my grandmother's era or before, you just received wisdom from your church and your community, and you followed it. And this was, there'd be a cultural dimension, there'd be a dimension of devotional. But there wouldn't be the pews wouldn't rise up against the priest for not being Orthodox enough or for not being Catholic enough, right? That is incredibly a non-Catholic attitude, to see the bishop doing something and then have the attitude, look, well, that bishop is not being Catholic enough. That's not a very Catholic attitude, in my opinion. Historically speaking. Yeah, but that's the position that a lot of Catholics find themselves in right now, where they see their church leadership and they say, I know what the real church, the eternal church, would do, and it's not what the temporal church is doing. That's completely turned on its head. Right? That's not how. There are actually more examples of this happening. With people like, I think it was Peter Demian, was that the guy? There were more examples of this happening before Martin Luther than there were after, I think. So, and so that this is, someone's going to nail me for bad church history there, but that's my impression is that's what's going on, is that there's sort of an inversion of what people psychologically associate with the Catholic imagination.
Then you have Jordan Peterson taking on the Pope on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Did you see? Oh, I actually am off Twitter, but I've heard about that. What? That's like the most bizarre.
The Pope had a tweet about social justice, and Peterson basically said, hashtag social justice. Hashtag's important. Peterson basically took on the hashtag, but this gets into the point that in this current system, we're all Protestants, because the dilemma of the Pope on Twitter is where we're at. Because for the Pope to not be on Twitter, well, how can the Pope not be on Twitter? But at the same time, once the Pope is on Twitter, you know, any noob or troll that can type in @Pontifex, you know, in a sense, can, you know, pick a fight with the Pope. And then the question is, okay, will the Pope respond? Well, if you're a Pope that's high and lifted up, who wants to do the Jesus thing and say, the greatest among you is the servant of all, why on earth won't the Pope respond to the troll? And so Jordan Peterson comes in as the troll, and he's a troll with, 3 million Twitter followers. So suddenly here we are in the social media realm. And of course, Trump, as comes into the presidency via Twitter, and Twitter was his realm, as it were. And now Elon. I mean, it's how can you be Catholic today? It's what you just said. I have a lot of other Catholic friends that I can't wait to hear this, and when they hear you, they're going to be going, "That's exactly right." And I had lunch with a good friend who's Catholic. I was visiting him in his Catholic school in New England when I was up there, and he's like, how many of these really ardent conservative Catholics in America don't just sound like Martin Luther before the Diet of Worms?
Yeah. Yeah, because we're essentially fighting the mainstream universal iteration of Christianity that rules the modern Western civilization, and that's the position we're in. I don't think that this disrupts the continuity of the Catholic Church in the apostolic sense, but it disrupts the narrative that the Church has had for itself in the post-Trent sense. For instance, I picked up all of these old manuals that were distributed to people. They're like Bibles with groups of Psalms in them, and like some of them were for brides. They would give these out to them on their wedding day or whatever. Some of them were for confirmation and stuff like that. But inside these little manuals, the Pope would he'd have like bulls against modernity and secular social justice. It would sound sort of like a Jordan Peterson thing, and so this push would be delivered from the Pope against the modes of mainstream sort of liberal Protestant Christianity popular in the United States. The idea that the stream would be reversed, and it would be the person being married or confirmed who would push back against the Pope about this is sort of an inversion of the pattern that's existed for so long that it literally was a part of Catholic publishing and Catholic adult education.
Does it go back? Does time zero only go in one direction with this? Like how do people go back to being pious, obedient acceptors? I guess we see with the diversity, equity, inclusion embodied in that progress flag, which is just becoming more and more of a mess. But that's the symbol of this Unitarian Universalist order, right? That progressive order. Yeah. Like how does we're all practicing being? You can go in the systems. You can do your diversity statement. You can figure out what parts of you are marginalized so that you can plug into the big system, and you can get along with that, and you can be Catholic in the system, in the bureaucracy, and kind of get ahead insofar as it's going anywhere. And then you can be outside of that. But being outside of that, I don't see how people be pious anymore other than being social justice warriors. In a sense, maybe I'm not seeing. I don't see us letting go of the hubris, letting go of the option of dissent once we get the bug.
I mean, I guess this might be a question for Paul. I mean, I believe that there is space for people to self-constrain and rediscover authenticity. The obvious answers to the question, historically speaking, and like if Spengler were in this room, he'd say that the society just has to die, and a catastrophe has to be emerged at spiritually and economically and physically, and then people there'll be a sort of a Merovingian reversion to constraint and authenticity. I myself believe that humanity can choose a more authentic and constrained path, and we might spare ourselves from a part of the tribulation, probably not all of it, and that in many ways that's sort of what you see in the Bible, is that, or in the many stories that exist in Scripture, from the Hebrew Testaments to even the Greek New Testaments, is you see that there are people that are sort of called towards elective acts of breaking with the system, so that they can spare themselves from God or history or nature's wrath. And that's sort of something I believe without evidence, but I think that's sort of what humanity. I don't know. Maybe, Paul, do you think that's possible?
Well, there's that tension again in terms of choice and authenticity, and calling is in some ways the way around it, because the part of, I think, that the contemporary anthropology is that there's a secret sacred self, and if I'm a man born in a woman's body, the exterior has to conform with this secret sacred sort of Gnostic self that is hidden within, so that I can become fully authentic and fully realized. I think Tom Holland's thesis in Dominion, which his book Dominion does not begin with Christ and the crucifixion. The book begins with the Hebrew prophets, that the prophets, Elijah goes to the king, and the prophets go to the king, and the king kills the prophets. Jesus then reenacts that, but of course Jesus is the son of the king who goes against the king and is killed by the earthly king. And so now you have, in some sense in Christianity, you have a story of perpetual revolutions, but it's never a revolution in the sense of the French Revolution, because Jesus is the Son of God and he's the servant of all. Jesus sort of holds the whole stack together and affords equality. You have one master and you are all brothers. So Jesus is this crazy figure that seems to hold all of this stuff together. But the tensions within it, I think we're talking about, where the true servant of the church rebels against the hierarchy of the church in order for the church to once again align itself with the truth. And these movements have always been within Catholicism, and because saints are often prophets as well, and they call the king of the church the pontifex. And remember, a lot of these titles of the Pope were inherited from the Roman emperor. I mean, there's a real line there that this movement continues. But how does the institution manage that? Now, in the American institution, you had checks and balances, you had division of power, you don't have a king. The British system, you have a king, but then you have a constitutional monarchy. I mean, all of these issues we're continuing to try to work out in dealing with change. And again, to get back into Peterson stuff, it's because hierarchies, they get rigid, they get corrupt, they get tyrannical, they have to be brought down. But you also can't live in this perpetual cycle of revolutions, because in a sense, the woke world sort of tries to say that's the norm. There's always progress, there's always revolution, but you get to a certain point and you get to the bottom, helter skelter, the little ride in the UK. So this it seems to be what we're working through, but we're doing so now on a scale, to sound like the Plan B people, we're doing so now on a scale where humanity, as it's had for the last 75 years, has the technological power to unseat sort of this natural order that we have sort of been dependent upon for millennia. So That was really rambly, and my apologies.
No, it's good. I mean, it really does make my. I guess I always kind of think about how this is going to resolve politically, and maybe this is not. But it seems to me that Vocal Danston said that Jordan Peterson he would be the alignment axis for sort of a new. He'd basically be the alignment of all sort of non-progressive forces that people would. He would be the de facto center point for a movement like that. And I do respect Jordan Peterson, but to me, I feel that that would kind of be Reagan 2.0, and I'm a little bit worried about that because I kind of want to see something very different emerge. I'm looking more towards finding people who are still leftists, still Marxists, but they're just so tired of the way modern politics works that they're hungry for something different. And they're willing to try sort of radically new things and radically new ways of life to achieve that end. And that's kind of the direction I'm looking at. And my fear, I guess, is that we'll try to pull a holding pattern. And I don't think that's what really this age calls for. I think this age calls for people doing a lot of different things in a lot of different directions.
I thought I heard Wokel not saying. I thought I heard him saying Jordan Peterson is the only one he sees trying it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. What do you see as Jordan Peterson's? He definitely is putting himself forward as a political figure. It seems. What do you see as his sort of political ambition? So to speak, it almost seems like he's kind of doing the William F. Buckley firing line thing a little bit. I mean, there's like Jordan Peterson 1.0, but Jordan Peterson 2.0, especially with his sort of like his manifesto and all that, it does kind of strike me a little bit Buckley-esque, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting that vibe.
Well, and one person on Twitter today, I thought he was right. He said, so Jordan Peterson's going to take on the WEF. Is the WEF really running things? And, a lot of people sort of point to the World Economic Forum, but I much more have the sense that this is now we're going to get into a whole different thing. I much more have the sense that we have principalities and powers instantiated and technological innovations that are those are what's running things. We don't have human beings at the levers of power. There aren't these grand conspiracies who are working things behind the scenes. I mean, part of what the game B people have right is that this thing radically changed the world, and human beings don't know what to do about it. And in a modernist system that dismissed the ideas of principalities and powers as pre-Enlightenment superstitions. Of course, remember, the Protestants were the demythologizers, and the Catholics were the ones who believed in miracles and relics and holy places and stuff. This changed the world. And okay, so Steve Jobs said, well, you don't need a stylus. We all have 10 fingers. Okay, fair enough, Steve. But Steve Jobs is no longer here to own up for better or for worse. And we have no idea where any of this goes. And, we saw this with nuclear weapons. We've seen this with the internet. We see it with smartphones. We've got with TikTok. There's just this pace of change that no one is running, but everyone says, we can't stop it because if we stop the AI, the Chinese will do it. And it seems to me that, okay, so you're going to gather 2,000 of who you think are the smartest people in the world, Jordan, on the opposite side of the World Economic Forum in London on, by the way, Reformation Day. That's the day he picks for his big world conference, and it's titled ARC. I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm fascinated to see what's going to come out of this. But I still think TikTok changes things more than a group of thinky-talky people with a lot of big ideas.
Well, World Economic Forum, its business model is that we're going to change the world in the way the world is already changing. And so it's like, it's basically they're cheering on a natural process that's happening. And what I think Klaus Schwab discovered is that if you can pretend to fight a dragon that's dying, you can look really, really strong. And so everyone who goes to the World Economic Forum can kind of pat themselves on the back because they've convinced themselves that the change that's already going on and being driven by technological processes is a function of their efforts. But I mean, they are.
You have a wounded dragon and a whole line of people ready to take their selfie with the dragon. Is that
exactly.
What you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And take your selfie with the dying dragon is, and pretend like you're slaying it that's the selling point of the World Economic Forum. That being said, I mean, they are encouraging policymakers to sort of push the process that's ongoing even harder and faster in the direction it's already going. And I think that can have destructive consequences, and I think it has. I think it does. I mean, if human race is faced with TikTok, and to a lesser extent Twitter, and to a much lesser extent just the internet generally, the only response to TikTok is to find some way to stop TikTok. The same thing for OnlyFans or Tinder. These technologies are. I mean, we know this now. It was hypothetical 10 years ago, and now we know this. Now we have the numbers in. Tinder does not lead, at least heterosexuals, on average, into sustainable family relationships. And TikTok does not the amount of people who habitually use TikTok and have a healthy relationship to TikTok is very, very small. These things are not designed to be healthy in the same way that junk food is not designed to be healthy. And the only way that the human being can react to this is to reject. I mean, is to reject it and say that we're not going to do this. I mean, imagine if when we invented opiates and sort of heroin derivatives like 100 years ago, roughly, maybe a little bit more. I think they really started coming out after World War I. But imagine if doctors just started prescribing heroin like aspirin to people. Imagine if this was the solution to all aches and pains, was just to take a shot, like a dose shot of heroin. And whenever somebody says, well, maybe we shouldn't give people heroin for headaches, even though it fixes their headache, and even though they really, really like getting heroin for headaches, and the response was, well, you can't stop technology. You can't stop technology. I mean, if we didn't give people heroin for headaches, they're asking for heroin for their headache. Look, you can't stop them. I mean, if we had done that, the human race would have probably not made it past the 1960s because everyone would be addicted to heroin right now. With nuclear weapons, I mean, the response to nuclear weapons was, I mean, it was to essentially put nuclear weapons only in some labs and heavily guard their use. It wasn't to help people all build breeder reactors in their backyards. There are a lot of technologies that we could have restricted the access to, even if our knowledge increases. This idea that just because we can do something, we have to. I have no idea where this idea comes from. If we had done that with high-powered drugs that we developed in the early 20th century, we would have destroyed the human race. And if we'd done that with nuclear technology, we would have the human race would have destroyed itself in war. And I don't necessarily see why is it inevitable? I don't understand why it is inevitable. I don't see why the human race has to invent the technology that destroys the human race. I don't understand why. And the only appeal we have is this appeal to inevitable historical forces that I'm not so sure I believe in inevitable historical forces. I did it when I was a progressive, largely because I believe that inevitable historical forces were on average good. But if we can see apocalypse on the horizon and our only response to it is, well, we have to push the big red button that ends the world because someone else will push the big red button that ends the world, and we want to be the people who push the big red button that destroys the world. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't see I feel like we're just high on this Hegelian idea of inevitable historical synthesis, and I shouldn't attribute that to Hegel. That really, I think people only really started believing that after Marx, but yeah, I don't believe in that. I think that there is an option. We have a future that we can choose. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the game of discussing politics and religion and answering questions, because maybe I would be, but in a very different way than I am right now, certainly.
But you use these tools to do your work, that work.
Oh, yeah, TikTok, but I mean, I and when I go to the hospital, I'll take maybe a heroin-based anesthesia, right? And and when I need to generate power really quickly, maybe for a submarine, maybe we'll use a nuclear reactor. But there's always good uses for technology, but the idea that because a technology has one use, that it has to be flung open to the world so that they can use it for anything. That does not make sense to me, especially when we can see that it hurts the human creature.
I think your argument is good, and I think you're right, and I think the heroin is a great example, and it may very well be that we turn away from TikTok and Tinder as heroin-like things as a culture. There is always sort of a learning curve, and if you look at heroin dens in the 19th century. Cocaine and Coca-Cola. I mean, there usually is a learning curve with a fair amount of destruction, and then as a group, we sort of settle on some things. But my main point is that the drivers of transformation. When I was home, I picked up a little thing that my grandmother had written, my cousin, talking about how her mother used to trudge through the snow with an axe to chop a hole in the river to get water, because 2 days a week she did nothing but wash clothes. We talk about the power of the birth control pill. The power of the washing machine was enormously transformative, and whereas perhaps certain very obviously short-term powerful things like heroin, we as a group can sort of easily come to consensus. It seems tremendously more complex to look at the washing machine and say, was it really good that women didn't necessarily have to? I mean, this is where you get back to Mary Harrington and maybe even Camille Paglia. Was it really good that women didn't have to spend 2 days a week burdened by the enormous labor of washing clothing for their family? I mean, it's those deeper questions that I think are more difficult for us to come to terms with. And when you come to, someone like Mary Harrington saying the transformational moment in transhumanism was the pill. Now suddenly,
I totally agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Now suddenly we're having a Roman Catholic conversation, and all the Protestants are left with their hands in their pockets wondering.
I thought that I do think Protestants, actually, a lot of congregations were on the ball with the birth control pill. They saw what was coming. It wasn't just I do want to kind of toot my own church's horn, but a lot of Protestants saw what would happen with the birth control pill. It wasn't a very cool idea, though, to oppose it, which is why we're in the situation that we're in right now.
But yet, Catholics in America, there has, at least for a number of generations from the Catholics that I've known, if Rod Dreher going to his priest after he converts to Catholicism and saying, "We want Catholic family planning," and the priest rolls his eyes and says, "Oh, you're one of them." So, and I think that brings us back to where you were in terms of, okay, you've got the institutions, the Catholic Church. Okay, here's your Catholic social vision. Can the Catholic Church itself instantiate it in an institution and popularize it and, live it out? I think that's a big part of this question.
Well, I mean, what other option is there? The humanity cannot live with technology the way that it is. And I was talking to, again, Mr. Bennett. I never can pronounce the last part of his Twitter handle, but Falakary, I think, Bennett Falakary. And he wrote this great article about the absolute birth collapse that's going on right now with the perpetuation of the human race. There is no way that humanity can survive when no one forms families, and so our options are not a modernity or post-modernity or pre-modernity. The option humanity has in front of itself is pre/post-modernity or death. And I believe in humanity enough to think that it will discover something that's after modernity, because modernity is just, it's not a living option, period.
Why did you say you believe in humanity?
What?
Why did you say you believe in humanity?
Oh, well, I shouldn't say I believe in humanity. I should say I believe in God. But yeah, you caught me out there. Well, I mean, I believe that God has not abandoned humanity. Maybe that would be a more accurate way of saying it, right? I believe that we aren't in this moment where I don't think humanity is being called to death right now. I think that maybe in my darker moments, I think that, but I think that there actually is another option here, and that's the hope that the right wing has right now, or the dissident right, is we're all trying to figure out what is the way that humanity embraces life.
Yeah. From Bronze Age pervert to the more Christian family planning people, the moral majority 2.0 people. There is a vitalism that is a part of the right wing, the yet unveiled eschatology of the right wing. There's something about life. You said reality and life, and I don't know if you can make a mythology out of reality, but I think that's something. That's an ingredient of it that distinguishes it from the left, just utter liberation from anything other than human will, which is necessarily transhuman. And probably was started probably around Miltonian times as a very modern project.
Yeah, I don't believe in transhumanity. I think that it's, when you talk about transhumanity, all you're gonna get is you're gonna get human weakness faster and reconfigured in ways that make you believe that it's something more than human judgment, but it is still human judgment.
So Dave, you what are you guys doing in real life? What's your cohort doing? Are you involved in the Good Old Boys project? Like, what are some of the ways that you're stepping beyond the internet?
The Good Old Boys are friends. They're talking about the podcast. What we're doing right now is a project called Basket Weaving through an organization we started called the Beowulf Foundation. And this is a cooperative project with a variety of different bloggers and groups supporting this. And really the idea is just to get people in real life meeting up and sharing their ideas for new projects. And it's not meant to be, so there are other projects like, like I said, I was just talking to Bennett, so I'm on, his thing is called Exit. There's another one called the Old Glory Club. These are more organizations, but the idea of basket weaving is not to be a fraternal organization, but to have people meet locally, discuss the ideas, and then develop their own organizations on top of that. It's meant to be a seedbed, and it might, eventually to flower forward into new things that are not under central direction so far. And I think the plan is to eventually evolve this into something that's more formalized. But right now, me and a variety of other people see the first step being, okay, we're sitting down together, we're recognizing the problems as, Paul has described them and as I described them. What makes sense in our own lives to actually confront these things, and what can we do to help each other? And I think the idea is from that something more vital will come to the fore. And I do believe that spirituality and spiritual rediscovery will have to be a part of that, a large part of that. But I have to admit here, Paul, and this is where you have me disadvantage. I'm not competent enough to describe spirituality in anything other than my own sort of poetry. I can't come up with systematic theology, and I certainly can't direct the church to solve its problems. I have more than my fair share of complaints about how the Catholic Church is running itself politically. A lot of complaints, like most modern Western Catholics do, who attend church. But all I can say right now is that a reemergence of Christian spirituality will have to come, and I only have very paltry tools to describe what I think is the necessary components of that rebirth. I'm not a person who can drive that. So I will say that I do politics and metapolitics and intellectual essay writing because I'm not strong enough to do spirituality in a proper sense, and I'm not qualified enough to do spirituality in a proper sense. And so for now, we'll have to kind of bend a knee to those who are. But I do think that when it comes to people who've dedicated themselves to God and to the spiritual life, I do think that they should hear the words of people like myself who are trying to poetically or not poetically or realistically describe the crisis that modern man finds himself in, and that's my request for our projects to kind of work together.
I think a lot of people assume that the way the church moves into the future is that there is a prophet or a priest who brings the word down on high and the people implement it. I have seldom seen that happen. I think more often the role of the clergy, and I have to be really careful with this because, you know, the 60s had the radical priest that Paul Simon sang about. The priest has to both have the pastor has to have his eye on the scripture, but his ear to the community and his eyes open to what's going on. And more often it's recognizing what God is doing and pointing the attention of the community and saying, look over there. God is working over here. Let's talk about that. Let's process that. Let's pray. Let's listen to God. Let's study his word. Let's talk to the great cloud of witnesses that is the community of the church, those who have gone before, those who have and together, this is the way we move forward. It's what you don't find, for example, in the New Testament is Paul of Tarsus laying down, here is the action plan by which we will conquer the Roman Empire. It ain't there.
Step one, a lot of us are going to have to get martyred.
That's right. All of you people signing up to be disciples for Jesus, if you only know how many of you are going to see old age.
The first step's a little bit of a slog. I'm not going to lie to you.
So,
but in 300 years, we'll be in charge. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you watch Paul wrestling with the Corinthians, and you watch Paul wrestling with the Romans and the Ephesians and the Colossians, and you watch all of this muddiness, and Constantine emerges, and of course he's a game changer. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, Eusebius thinks it's a good thing. And this seems to be how we go forward. And in Christian terms, we would say, we follow the Lord, we listen to his Holy Spirit, and we go forth in faith together. And when I look at the emerging church from, Dave, I look at your story. I mean, I remember, a video where you laid out your story. And I think it was that Jordan Peterson trilogy that you did a few years ago. It was a beautiful video. And, you are part of that story. And the story that's happening out there, that's the story that's been happening in you. And so I wouldn't just look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church. You had all of these at the time of the Reformation. Part of why the Reformation went is that there were all sorts of lay Catholics doing all sorts of different things all over the place, and these things emerged into new things. And so I am by no means pessimistic, but I definitely do not have a roadmap. And if Paul of Tarsus didn't have one, and Jesus didn't really give one as such, I think what that means is that we walk forward in faith, trusting that the Lord will provide.
That's well said. I definitely think that Paul doesn't have a roadmap, except I think that the great saints didn't have roadmaps per se. But there were paths that they followed, and they did look into the future and think about how they would lead their people there, and especially, I don't know, Constantine's probably not a very holy example, although I don't think he was necessarily an evil man, but he did have a vision for Rome. He did have a vision, and so did Charlemagne. So did Clovis. So did King Louis. So did all of the sort of Christian leaders that led their people forward. And I think there's different roles for everyone to play. But the future is going to belong to the people who can tell a realistic story about hope. And the problem is that the hopeful stories either sound, well, the stories that are progressive that sound hopeful sound fake, not to mince words, and the stories that are hopeful that conservatives tell sound like cope. And fake and cope are not the same things, but they sound false in different ways. And progressive stories sound like they could never happen and that they're selling you something, and conservative stories sound like they don't have the strength to make them happen, and although they could happen hypothetically, the people are telling you the story as a means of selling themselves. And those are very different things, but the thing is that nobody is believing the hopeful stories anymore. And all they have to descend to is this kind of doomerism. For instance, the prospect of runaway AI is actually fairly implausible. It's not implausible, but it's a low likelihood. It seems even less likely than, say, something like nuclear war ending the world, right? But it's psychologically plausible in the present era because people can't imagine things getting better, because there's no realistic way of imagining things getting better, at least using the language that we've commonly used today. And that's what, and Paul didn't have a plan. He didn't have an agenda or an action item list, but he did have a story about a kingdom that was hopeful. And I don't want to say that you can't sell Paul's vision of the kingdom of God to modern audiences, but there is some barrier for modern audiences in accepting this. There's a psychological barrier in my own mind, and I've committed to the belief in Christianity, full stop. And even my wife tells me that I can't emotionally internalize the hope of the gospel. I intellectually internalize it, but I can't emotionally internalize it. And that's a spiritual failing on my part. But I think that this is something that's just common to my generation. And I don't know.
That's exactly what I was saying before about people. When they say they don't believe, they're saying exactly what you just said there.
And they're not saying that they intellectually don't believe. They're saying that they emotionally don't.
Exactly. But every time someone steps up to the altar and says, "Till death do us part," they are living out hope. Every time someone brings a child into this world and says, "No matter come hell or high water, I will always be this child's father or mother," they are expressing hope, even if they dare not say it. And I don't think it's stopping.
Any promise kept is a basis for hope. And Paul, that I kind of define being right wing as being on the side of keeping promises. But that is, but this is the age in which all promises that were made previously have fallen away, and that's why no one believes in promises anymore. But yeah.
Well, if you stay married, if you can stay married, and I think that's why basket weaving, meeting together. It starts with people, and it starts with small groups of people, and that learn to keep promises to each other.
Also, this about basket weaving, one thing I've discovered is that you're meeting up with people on the internet that you haven't met for the first anyone, like they're all strangers. So everyone comes into basket weaving hoping the other guys aren't serial killers planning on murdering them. And we always end the evening by people fighting over who can cover everyone's dinner, right? So everyone's fighting over who can pay the multiple $100 bill at the end of the night. So in real life is just, I think promises can only be meaningfully made in real life. And insofar as you're making a promise online, there has to be a relationship there that is substantial and that has more of a real life quality than a social media quality to it. I don't know how we're going to get the social media genie back in the bottle. I personally think that we're going to move back to Web 1.0, and everyone's going to be doing things like they're going to be treating social media like Substack, like emails, right? We're going to go back to more of an email and direct peer-to-peer model. Maybe with stuff like this where, this is public, even though I'm really here just to learn from Paul, right? Personally speaking, right? Although I love your audience, Ben, so no offense, but this is kind of a weird because it is a private conversation that's public, and but at the same time, it's the private relationship that confers the trust, and therein lies the hope. And absolutely, the marriage, keeping the marriage, keeping the family relationship, it's got to start there for us lay people. I think there might be a separate path for people who aren't pursuing families, and that's important. But you caught me rambling, so.
Well, guys, thanks very much for allowing me to host this conversation. It's great to have you both on, and I'm here to learn from both of you and try to catch up. So,
and thank you, Benjamin, and
absolutely.
keep doing what you're doing.
Yes,
absolutely.
It's really important.
I'm a huge fan of your work, Ben. There's so many great interviewers out there, but you do bring something very unique to these conversations in the way
Je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I first encountered your style, I wasn't the biggest fan, but I've grown to become a fan over time and realize the genius in your methodology. So, it was great speaking to you, Paul, and I always learn a lot from Paul's wisdom, and I hope we can continue to build our projects together going forward.
Amen.
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 All right, guys. Thanks so much, Paul. It was great talking to you.